Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all safe and well. Welcome to the Province of West Lancashire Provincial Office webinar. Special welcome to those joining from other provinces and to those watching on YouTube Live. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. My name is Andrew Ridal and I'm the Provincial Deputy Grand Secretary. So what we're going to be looking at today is just starting to think about the restart of Masonic meetings. It is a little bit of a, I apologize in advance if it's a little bit, I don't want to come across as teaching Granny how to suck eggs, but I want to just make sure that there are things to think about beyond what you may well have considered so far. So I'm going to kind of go for lowest common denominator at the beginning, and we can go from there. So what's going to be looking at? I hope you can see my screen. Can you just give me a thumbs up if you can? Lovely. Going to cover preparing to meet, then contingency plans and other considerations. Looking at installations and elections again, I'm afraid, because obviously the things keep changing on that. And then some general guidance. So if you do have any questions as we go along, like I say, please do just type them in into the chat, or you can electronically put your hand up. You'll find that, and at the bottom of your screen you can do that. So if you do want to ask any questions as we go along, please feel free. You don't have to wait until the end of the meeting. So thinking about preparing to meet, going to look at when we can meet, where we can meet, what business do you have, looking at regular and emergency meetings, what rehearsals may be necessary, and just covering a couple of points on virtual meetings as well, just to cover these. So the first question is, when can we meet? United Grand Lodge issued the first rising last week, on Monday last week, and they said at government stage 3, essentially rule of 6 meetings are permissible under some circumstances. However, the Provincial Grand Master is keen that ceremonies aren't done with only 6 people present, and he would prefer it if people just contacted the provincial office before you thought about having a meeting in stage 3. So stage 3, whilst meetings can go ahead, please contact the provincial office before you make firm plans to do so. And that's the first point on that. Now, at the government roadmap stage 4, which is not before the 21st of June, obviously, we don't quite know how many twists and turns there are going to be in this roadmap as we go along, but not before the 21st of June. At stage 4, all things being equal as it stands at the moment, all meetings would be permissible, and it is essentially a return to normal at stage 4, and that's when you can have meetings of as many people as you'd like indoors, and normal food and drink service resumed, and the social distancing things relaxed, rules and regulations relaxed. So that's what the stage 4 essentially means, and that will mean that all meetings are effectively permissible and it's returned to normal. So lodges and chapters won't be returning to their bylaws until stage 4, or whatever equivalent will be after that. Chris, yes, I will be sharing the slides after the meeting. They'll come out not quite in this form, but they'll come out in a how-to document, because there's more that I'm going to say on them other than just the points on there. So essentially, we're looking at a return to the bylaws at stage 4 as it stands at the moment. Obviously, there's lots of caveats going in there with regards to actually what changes between now and June. So the next question is, where can we meet, and considerations about that. Well, obviously, you need to check with your Masonic hall or meeting place to see when they're opening, what's going to be available, and are there any extra policies or procedures in place, and how you can best communicate those to your members. The sooner you communicate any new policies or procedures in place, be that one-way systems at Masonic halls, for example, the better. And you'll need to do that obviously before rehearsals as well, not just prior to meetings. So always a good idea to check with those. If your Masonic hall isn't available, obviously you can always request a dispensation. They are available for other meeting places, so you can also look at that. So from Bill, regarding issuing summonses for senatorius in particular due on the 1st of June, we don't expect summonses to be issued from until stage 4 at this point in time. But we are waiting for London to confirm that. But at this point in time, we are anticipating, the Provincial Grand Master is not anticipating meetings to go ahead until stage 4. However, he is willing to consider certain exceptions to that. So no summonses don't need to be issued until stage 4. So thinking about what business do we have, and this is really the kind of first step that I wanted to go through to really kind of that puts us back in the mind frame for meeting. I'm going to cover installations in the next section for obvious reasons, because it's quite a large one. But just thinking about candidates now, initially, the candidates for initiation and exaltation. If you've got those lined up, and I know that many lodges do have candidates many lodges and chapters do have candidates in the pipeline, and for obvious reasons, they are keen to get those in straight away or as quickly as possible. Now, that may not necessarily be the best case, and I'm going to come on to those, come on to why that might be in a second, but also how we can look at getting those people in sooner rather than later as well. So the first question is, whilst we might be meeting, when are the candidates available? So that's the first question for them, if they are available themselves. A key point is when your financial year end is. Now, I know that some lodges and chapters prorata their fees. But if you, for example, your first meeting back is in September and your lodge subscription year starts on the 1st of October, if you initiated somebody in September, your lodge would become liable for the fees from both this year and next year, in effect. So you'd be you either be charging the candidate for 2 years up front, of which he's only going to get benefit for one of those years, or one of those years plus a few days, or the lodge is going to incur those costs. So that's going to be at least the provincial dues, the provincial registration fee, the United Grand Lodge dues, and the United Grand Lodge registration fee. So that's what the lodge would be liable for. And then they would again be due on the 1st of October, which for the sake of waiting another month, is it actually best to get them in as soon as possible? So that's just something to consider. When you're thinking about, and that's an extreme case, the kind of meeting in September and the financial year starting in October. But it's very easy to see that being actually your first meetings in October, your financial year starts in January. So actually, they're getting the October meeting when they're initiated, their November meeting. The lodge doesn't meet in December. January is the first meeting, so they're getting effectively 1 and a bit meetings at their for their year's fee, or the lodge is getting that as well. So is it the best thing for the lodge to bring them in straight away? And of course, the lodge may take the decision that yes, it is, and choose not to pass on that fee to candidates, which is absolutely fine as well. If the lodge was passing that on to candidates and asking them to pay 2 years, then that's something perhaps they need to have a think about. Obviously, that's a matter for them, but it's something that they may wish to consider. If there are a large number coming in and you're coming up to through the financial year, you may consider, I know some people don't like them, you may looking at consideration between either doing double ceremonies or holding emergency meetings so you can get them in good time. And I'm thinking kind of if you have a couple of candidates and your year end is in kind of March and you wanted to bring them in as early as possible within from September, you may consider having a double ceremony or an emergency meeting if, for example, you had a 50th celebration coming up and then your installation. So it would be January before you could initiate the second one, and therefore, the same applies in terms of the amount of meetings and the amount of bang for their buck they're getting in the first year. So you may consider looking at either adding an extra meeting in or doing a double ceremony for that. So that's something to consider. The other thing to consider is looking at, might Rule 160 be used? Now, we are considering it suitable to use 160, assuming what I've said about the financial year end holds true, that if a candidate has previously been balloted for, and as such, now that ballot has expired. So that is to say, a candidate would have been admitted into the lodge, would have already been initiated had it not been for the pandemic. They have already been approved by the lodge because the ballot was favourable, but just the circumstances mean that that ballot has elapsed. To avoid any further delay, London have said it is appropriate that Rule 160 in this instance be considered. And that is the rule that allows somebody to be proposed, balloted for, and initiated at the same meeting. And that can be an emergency meeting as well. But you must propose, ballot, and initiate them at the same meeting. So it is perfectly appropriate for that to be used in those circumstances. And I'm sure you can appreciate the difference between somebody that's coming in that the lodge hasn't known for very long, against somebody that's already actually been approved by the lodge, that's maybe been participating with Zoom calls and whatever throughout the period of the lockdown and the pandemic. I'm sure you can see the difference between those. Malcolm, you've got your hand up. Just let me.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. Can I just ask, and maybe you are coming on to that in a minute, but joining members, can they be dealt with the same?
No, they can't. Joining members aren't applicable under Rule 160. So even if you balloted for the joining members, you have to go through the same process. That's how it stands at the moment. So you ballot at one meeting, and you'd propose at one meeting and ballot at the next, and obviously admit them at the second meeting. In Royal Arch, you have the option as you know, you have the option to propose in writing on the summons. So in Royal Arch for joining members, that isn't an issue because you can propose on the summons, and that's for exaltees and joining members in Royal Arch. You can do that. So as long as their name and details are on the summons for ballot for joining or ballot for initiation, you can do that. To answer your question, Malcolm?
Sorry, I probably... yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Mark, do you want to come in?
Thanks, Andrew. Good afternoon. I've put on chat to everyone. We have a couple of candidates from the membership team that have been allocated to our lodge. They haven't been previously balloted for. Can we use Rule 160, or do we have to have a meeting to propose and ballot for them?
It's not hard and fast that it has to be somebody that has been balloted for. That is the case that has been laid. That's the circumstances that have been laid out. So if these people have been hanging on for a long time,
they have.
and have been coming to the lodge, lodge socials, been engaged with that, and being well engaged with it, then it's certainly a consideration that the lodge can take. Remember that the onus of whether it is appropriate to use Rule 160 or not, and I think it's very clear in terms of what feels right from a common sense point of view. If they've been hanging on for 18 months, then it's probably makes sense to at least look at it. The onus relies on the master. It's not on the province. It's not on anyone else. It is on the master to decide whether he feels that there is a pressing need for this to happen. And I think anybody would. I think it's relatively clear when it feels right and when it doesn't feel right to use that. So if they've been hanging on for a long time, then it is probably something that you could look at doing, could look at using.
Unfortunately, it doesn't quite fit our bill because the candidates have only just been identified by the membership team to us. They have been holding on. Certainly the two I'm talking about have been waiting for over a year. They haven't yet been met by anybody because of the current lockdown. The intention is to meet them and then get them to a couple of socials during the summer. And then we're in the situation where what you're saying is they've got to be proposed and balloted for and then initiated at a separate meeting. So we need 2 meetings. I'm just looking at timings, Andrew, and what else is going on in the lodge, etc.
It feels in that case, because they are essentially new to the lodge, although not new to the membership officer. It feels as though actually waiting that extra meeting isn't going to hurt too much. It would be more appropriate.
Yeah, unfortunately, our first meetings are installation and then a 50th. And so by the time we get to actually initiating them, it may even be January next year, which is something that I'd want to try and avoid. But we'll look at other things.
It depends when your financial year is as well. So.
Well, 1st of October, first meeting is the first Saturday in October. So,
actually, kind of January, February isn't, is not really that inappropriate, is it?
No, it isn't for us. It may be for them, and I just want to make sure we try and get them in as quickly as we can.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, no problem. So, like I said, this is the case that's been outlined where they've been previously balloted for, but as we've just illustrated, there are other considerations to take into account there, and that's very much it's one of those that it either feels right, or it feels as though you're trying to do a workaround and kind of get round something. And if it feels the latter, it is not appropriate to use Rule 160. So 2nd and 3rd degrees. Obviously, then you may have some candidates which have now been waiting quite some time for their passing and raising. And there are kind of ways to help alleviate that backlog. Again, it might be a case of looking to emergency meetings, or as is done relatively regularly. Farming, I know that's a horrible phrase, farming out to other lodges. So saying to other lodges in your group or area, we have this person, we wouldn't be able to get them through before X date. Would you raise them or pass them on our behalf? It's good if a lodge doesn't have any work to do and they haven't got a candidate. It gives them something to do and just helps kind of share the love a little bit. Some lodges like to do it, other lodges don't. But if you are facing a particular backlog, maybe you've got 3 or 4 candidates which need their passing and raising, it's something that you can look at doing just so that you're not unnecessarily holding them up. A key thing to consider on that is obviously the preparation of the brethren that you're going to be doing that for. By definition, they are newer Masons, and as such may not necessarily be as comfortable and as familiar with the ritual as you'd like. So whilst you may have taken them through their questions 14 months ago, they may just need a little bit of help with those and to kind of get back into the mindset, even as I do. You kind of lose that sense of the language and the rhythm of the of how it works. So that's something to bear in mind and consider as well. Obviously, another thing, we've missed quite a few celebrations within that. So 50th and 60th are backing up as well, and there are going to be some very busy assistant provincial Grand Masters over the next year or so to try and get through all those celebrations as well. But again, it's something that it may be more appropriate to hold a celebration on at an emergency meeting as opposed to at a regular meeting, purely because the preference is that the celebration be the only item of business that evening, or the only significant item of business that evening. So if you have other bits and pieces going on, it might be more appropriate to move that to a different date, so that you can do that. Plus, it may fit in with diaries better as well. So that's something that you could look out if you've got a couple of them going on, and they may block other meetings going on as well. So kind of clearly thinking about what business do you have to get through, it's not difficult to see how all of a sudden the lodge may find itself with 8-9 meetings worth of business before you even consider what's coming in the next season alone, which so you may find yourself having to consider doing other meetings here and there to try and get through them. So thinking clearly about what business do you have is something that it's like I say, I don't want to come across as teaching Granny how to suck eggs by any stretch of the imagination, but actually I did this exercise with my own lodge, which I'm secretary of, and it was like, oh yeah, we need to do and that, and all of a sudden, kind of trying to work out the schedule was looking interesting, shall we say? So it's worthy of consideration at least. So thinking about which, let's just have a outline some regular and emergency meetings. And again, I appreciate that this is quite basic stuff for a lot of you, but I think it's just worth going at it. And one of the questions that we have been getting is actually, when is our next regular meeting? Well, that is as stipulated. The regular meetings are those as stipulated in your bylaws. So, the first Tuesday of, the second Tuesday of September to April or something like that. That might be your meeting pattern. So, effectively, your next regular meeting would be the second Tuesday in September. Just as an example in that. And obviously there's certain business which you can transact at regular meetings, that you can't do at emergency meetings as well. So might an emergency meeting be required? And that's one of the things that I've talked about previously as well. And you can have, this is obviously at the pleasure of the Right Worship Provincial Grand Master, you can have any number of emergency meetings, obviously within reason, with the exception that you can't meet twice on the same day. So if you do have lots of things that you need to get through, or you want to get people in, then you can, of course, have more than one emergency meeting. And I know that some lodges are looking at meeting in July and August over the summer, just to get through some business as well. And that's obviously fine. They're having one meeting in July, one meeting in August. And they start back normally on their normal meeting pattern in September, as things stand at the moment anyway. So it seems like an odd question to ask, but again, it has come up. What is the next regular meeting? And this is, by definition, it is the next regular meeting that takes place. And this is something which has come up and came up early. And this is particularly important for propositions. Now we're talking about propositions. If you propose somebody in March last year and you're not meeting and you haven't met since, then in September, if your lodge meets in September, that is the next regular meeting. Even though there would have been effectively a whole season's worth of meetings in between, the next regular meeting is the meeting that takes place. So let's just have a look at that. I don't know why I've put second Tuesday in that as opposed to first Tuesday, but I meant first Tuesday. So there could have been the 3rd of March 2020, and that was meeting number 100. And they've not met since. The 7th of September is the next regular meeting. And in purposes of kind of continuity, and I know some lodges like to put the numbers on the summons, that is the next regular meeting, and as such, rule meeting number 101. I hope that's clear. So things that you have to do at one meeting, give notice at one meeting, or propose at one meeting, and ballot for at the next, or take action at the next. If you did that at the last meeting, the last regular meeting that you actually held, actually opened and closed properly, then the first meeting back that you actually open and close properly as per your lodge bylaws is the next regular meeting. And I know that kind of it's a simplistic thing to say, but it does just make people think a little bit, particularly about the numbering of the meetings as well. The minute book, obviously, is something which also comes into question as well. And you need to enter notices of suspension in the minute book, and an explanation as effectively as to why meetings weren't happening in this period. So in the initial suspension, there's the notice from the Grand Master, you may have been abandoning meetings, in which case you need to stipulate that the meeting was attempted to meet but was abandoned. Then back in October, the Provincial Grand Master issued the suspension until further notice. That was on the 20th of October, if you want to check your emails. And then that covers you through until you actually start meeting again. So those kind of things do need to be covered in the minute book as a note. Peter, I see your question regarding joining members, or rejoining members. Same applies as per joining members, I'm afraid. So it is a case of you just having to wait until the next meeting before they arrive. Liam, if a meeting was attempted but then abandoned, how might that be impacted? It is the number of meetings that happened. If the meeting was abandoned, the meeting didn't happen. So by definition, it didn't happen, if you see what I mean. It was attempted, but it didn't. a summons is only a summons to a meeting. If that meeting didn't happen, then just because the summons has been issued doesn't make that meeting a meeting. It only is a meeting once the Worshipful Master has declared the lodge open with the necessary quorum there. So that covers the regular and emergency meetings. Bill, yes, I will send out the different wordings that are suggested for the suspensions and abandonment notices to go in with those. They are available on the website in the frequently asked questions section. But yes, I will send them out when I send out the slides for this presentation as well. What I'll also do is include the wording that you need to include for if you are using Rule 160 to propose ballot and initiate candidates as well, because there is a declaration for the master to say in that. Okay, so again, this is kind of simple stuff, but I'm mentioning it for the sake of mentioning it, so that it would normally go without saying, but I think it's just getting back into that mindset of thinking, obviously, and this is one of the more obvious things that I'll say today, more rehearsals than normal may be necessary. Because if you're anything like me, I've forgotten half of it. I don't know about you guys. So more rehearsals than normal may be necessary. And of course, that leads on to, is the meeting place available for rehearsals? And if people are having more emergency meetings, might your rehearsals clash with those emergency meetings from other lodges, for example? These are all things to consider. You may wish to consider running through the ritual virtually on Zoom or something like that. Obviously not using signs, words or tokens, but you may just consider getting a Zoom call up and just running through the opening and closing, so that when you get to the into the lodge room for the first time, you've got that sort of in your head, if nothing else. One exercise which also may be good for both the older and newer members of the lodge is actually just putting heads together on a virtual meeting and just putting together a meeting checklist. So you might consider, it's a good thing to go at. What do we need out of the tilers? What do we need to get out of the tilers cupboard, for example? And that could be a really good exercise for some learning points for some of the younger brethren as well, or newer brethren too as well. Just to go through. We need the cushions, we need the gavels, we need the tracing boards, this, that, and the other to come out, and just so that you're thinking about what else needs to happen within that. It would be a good learning point for some people, but it also just acts as that aid memoir to make the first meeting run smoothly. So something to consider doing that. Just it would be good to look at, perhaps. So just to cover virtual meetings, I know we've talked about virtual meetings over the last year a lot, but just to go through, what is permitted. I'm going through what is permitted essentially to get onto what's not permitted, but we'll, rehearsals, social catch-up, organized socials and fundraisers, quizzes, etc. There's lots of those going on at the moment. Committee meetings, general purposes meetings, past masters meetings are, all perfectly acceptable to go on as our planning meetings. And pretty much anything else you can think of, except what is not permitted. You can't hold elections, you can't hold ballots, and essentially any business that you would normally only transact at a regular meeting, such as approving lodge accounts, that kind of thing, you can't do those on a virtual meeting. But pretty much everything else, providing you're not using words, signs, tokens, you are absolutely fine to do on a virtual meeting. And indeed, it is encouraged. So that's kind of looking at sort of preliminary stuff about how to meet. I'm just going to go through some contingency plans and other considerations now. We're going to look at briefly at dispensations, talk about personnel, look at festive boards, visitors, vaccines as well. So, I appear to have a duplicate side. There we are. Visitors, charity, vaccines, and attendance. I thought there was more to that. So, dispensations. Please use the online form to request them. It means that I get a tracking reference for each one, and I can easily manage them. If it's just a request sent by email, I'm likely to lose it. So please use the online, and they're available. I'm sure you are more than familiar with what they're available for. I would just, there are others beyond this, just point out that the Master of Two Lodges, so Master of Two Lodges, this one, that is a request that needs to go to London. So please, as soon as you have elected your next master, that we need to go to London with that. So so please do. So I'm just looking at let's have our next regular meeting 3 days. Ron, we can just thanks for the message. We can talk about that at the end, and I'll have a chat with you about it. So just going back to the dispensations, these are what's available. Please apply in good time for them. We can turn them around quite quickly, but you do need to give appropriate notice on the summons anyway. So if you're applying for a dispensation for a meeting that's coming up within a couple of weeks, then getting the summons out isn't really going to be possible. But that being said, we can turn a dispensation around relatively quickly, and if you do need it relatively quickly, put the application in online and then give me a ring just to flag it up to me, and it's likely that you'll get it done sooner rather than later. We no longer post out dispensations, so you'll get an electronic version of that that form. We've never charged for dispensations, but we're no longer posting them out, so you'll get it electronically for that. So summonses, just thinking about the extra information which may be included, like I've said before, about the guidance from the Masonic calls and Masonic centers. There may be extra information which would be good to include on the summonses, and as such, some reformatting may be required. There is no set format to a summons, and I know lodges and chapters usually have a very set format for their summons. Over the next couple of months, they may just need to be a bit flexible regarding the exact format of their summons to be able to fit in some of the extra information which they need to be included. I don't think I need to say more than that on that, but just be aware that don't shout at anybody if the format has changed slightly from what you're absolutely used to, if it's obvious to include lots more information. They still need to be sent out in good time, and obviously we recommend, in some cases it's required that they go out at least 14 days prior to the meeting. It's a good rule of thumb in the first instance. I've already talked about the numbering of meetings, and just remember to send them to Diana as well at central office. So again, it's second nature to a lot of you, but just to remember to send a copy of your summons into the provincial office as well. It's that kind of thing which you can easily just forget. So thinking about personnel, who's available for the meetings? You know, are they happy to come? Are they do it? Are they willing and able to come? Can all the work be done, be covered from members of the lodge. If it can't, perhaps you could consider inviting visitors to conduct parts of the ritual, just to. The only reason I say this is to take the pressure off somebody who is feeling uncertain about attending, and rather than feeling pressurized to attend, telling them categorically that we have got someone to cover this if you don't want to attend. It could be very reassuring to people so that they don't feel pressurized into attending. I wouldn't normally say that, but that point regarding inviting visitors, but it is something that could be particularly valuable at this point in time. Likewise, it may be the case that somebody who normally gets to meetings on their own, under their own steam, may, for whatever reason, need assistance travelling to meetings. Be that they normally come on public transport and they're unsure about that at the moment. It may be that the person that used to bring them to meetings may not be in a position to do that anymore for whatever reason. So just be conscious of people that you've never really even considered before as having an issue attending meetings, that you may wish to just make sure that all your brethren can attend and don't need any help with that. Obviously, if you are considering car sharing and things like that, please just be aware of the government guidance that's available for that at the moment. I haven't stated it here because it's going to be changing, but it's always good just to double check that kind of thing at this point in time. And obviously, I know we would normally do this, but I try and encourage people to book in, particularly visitors to book in, just so you know who they are, and so you have some idea in terms of being able to properly get in touch with people if necessary. I'm not going to cover much on festive boards because I don't really think it needs this particular pudding needs over egging at all. Other than to say, be aware of spacing, make sure the stewards are diligent and observing hand hygiene, that kind of thing. Check the guidance on singing at the moment. You can't at the moment. Quite what that will be in 2 months' time, I have no idea. But just remember to enjoy and have fun at the festive board, and enjoy meeting together as opposed to necessarily worrying about meeting. And do try and enjoy it. Just a note on visitors now. This hasn't changed. This has always been the case. It is not a right to go and visit a lodge. So don't, just because you turn up, you should not expect to be admitted. It is visiting. It is not a right. It is within the gift of the master. And likewise, visitors should familiarise themselves with any relevant policies or procedures that may be in place at that particular Masonic hall, particularly if it's not your usual hall, obviously. And it's always advisable to check before you go and visit a lodge. If they're having in-house meetings, so to speak, at the moment, because that's a decision that the lodge has taken, you don't just want to assume that when you turn up, you'll be able to go. So it is advisable to check and book in beforehand. Again, it's just these things which you don't necessarily think about, and it's very easy to kind of slip into habits, and actually people have just adapted them a little bit. So charity, again, I'm not going to go into much detail about this at all. And just to say that cashless giving is still encouraged, and there are the new QR codes as well that are available for that. If your lodge has its own relief chest, they are available. Care should be taken when handling money. I've seen various ways of doing this recently. Potentially my favorite one has been emptying the envelopes into a washing up bowl. Now that the notes are all polymer notes, they're much more water resistant. So you don't have to necessarily worry about it. Just opening the envelope and straight into a washing up bowl full of solution to kind of disinfect the coins instantly. I think that's been one of my favourite things that I've seen recently. But again, what's right for one lodge isn't necessarily right for the other. Now, one of the questions we have been getting is around vaccines. The first point is that it's a matter for the master who is admitted to the lodge. Full stop. There is no guidance or requirement from province or UGLE regarding vaccinations at the moment. Whether that is going to change or not, I don't know. But at the moment, there is no guidance on it at all. Obviously, vaccinations are strongly advised. But I would say that obviously not everybody has been offered a vaccine yet, and there are those in lower age groups who haven't yet been offered a vaccine. So just be mindful of that if you're going to say that you'd prefer everybody to be vaccinated who attends the lodge meeting. Just be aware that some people may not have been invited for a vaccine yet if you're going to do that. But as I said, at present, there's nothing from province or UGLE on it. And ultimately, if a lodge decides, the master decides that they would prefer everybody in attendance to have a vaccine, that is absolutely a matter for the lodge and for the master of the lodge to decide, in absence of anything else from province or from UGLE. So, going to look at installations and elections now. I'm going to run through some terms because I'm quite specific on the terms that I use within these. So forgive me. I know a lot of you will be familiar with these, but again, I just want to be absolutely sure on some of the definitions. Then we'll look at investitures and election of officers, proclamations, installations, Royal Arch, installations, craft, and then the emergency measures. So this is the glossary of terms, and apologies for this, but just to make sure everybody's absolutely clear on them. The election is the election of the master, principals, treasurer, tiler by ballot. Okay. The declaration is the declaration of a result of an election. And the result of an election may be declared without a ballot if there is only one candidate, and that's Rule 105A and Regulation 48. A proclamation is where the current master, where the incumbent is remaining in office. Declaration and proclamation often get mixed up. So just bear in mind the specific difference between declaration and proclamation. Installation is where a new or different master is to take on the office. Again, read first principle with that as well. And then investiture is the master investing his officers for the ensuing year. So just to be absolutely clear on those terms, I think it's helpful so that you know exactly where I'm coming from with them. First question that I often get asked is, do we need to hold elections? The answer is yes. Okay, regardless of whether the incumbent is staying in or not, yes, you do need to hold elections. So let's look at investitures and the election of officers. So the situation in this case is the master has continued in office because the installation hasn't been able to, has been missed under Rule 107 and 108, or 108. So that's at some point over the past year, the installation was due to have taken place, but hasn't. Okay. So the actions that are required in the lodge meeting here are, sorry, just let me get catched up. So the election of the treasurer and tiler take place. And this is usually immediately after the minutes have been approved. And then, with no other action, the master invests his officers. So the result of the election of the treasurer and Tyler are declared. DC comes out and says, "Worship Master, whom do you appoint as senior warden?" The note here is that no action is taken with regards to the situation of the master. He has continued by virtue of the rules in the Book of Constitutions. Therefore, no proclamation, no note needs to be made other than that in the minutes that he has continued. There is nothing that needs to happen in it being announced at all. So that's where the election has been missed. The installation has been missed, and it's time to invest in the officers. So let's look at proclamations. And these are happening on the regular day of installation. So so there are two cases here. The first case is that the master was elected on the regular day of election, i.e. the election meeting took place as normal as per the lodge bylaws. So we're now on the regular day of installation, which is the next regular meeting after the day of election. And the master is proclaimed master for the ensuing year. He then proceeds with the investiture of the officers. So that's the straightforward, that's the model that we all kind of recognize between, with, if it had been somebody else going in the chair, they would have been installed. Whereas in this instance, the incumbent is just proclaimed as master for the ensuing year. So that's the easy one. Case 2, the election meeting did not take place. And if the election meeting did not take place, we know that the election moves and takes place on the regular day of installation. That's Rule 106. It says if it doesn't take place, it moves to the next meeting, i.e. the regular day of installation. So this is where it changes slightly. That election for the master for the ensuing year, if the election is declared in favour of the incumbent, nothing happens. He then proceeds immediately to the investiture of the officers. So in case 2, the declaration of the result of the election in favour of the incumbent is sufficient. No proclamation is necessary or appropriate. He simply continues and proceeds to invest his officers. You don't then have to come back in a month's time and proclaim him as master for the ensuing year. You simply just carry on with the investiture of normal. The declaration of the election result in his favour, in favour of the incumbent, is sufficient. So that's the case 2 of the proclamations. I know a lot of people, a lot of lodges are considering putting in the same person. So that's, but have missed the election meeting, and that's the case as outlined in case 2. So look at installations in the Royal Arch. Malcolm Alexander is more than familiar with these. I'm sure he could take us through. So if the elections have been held, the current principals elect, and at the next meeting, the first regular convocation that you're back, the current principals elect are installed if they're present. As simple as that. And even if that takes place, even if it is on the day of the election of their successors, because they have been elected, they shall be installed. Okay. So if the elections have not been held, then it would be the case that you are electing and installing principals for the current year at the same convocation. So if the elections have not been held, you elect and install principals for the current year at the same convocation, except, and this is the exception that Graham Redman ruled when he was on the chat the other day, except if this takes place on the day of installation for the ensuing year. And he said it would be a nonsense to have two sets of elections and installations at the same convocation. The Book of Constitution says that you should have the two sets of elections and installations on the same day, but common sense prevails, and that you would just elect and install the principals for the ensuing year. You don't have to do the extra bit of installing and electing the principals. So you just have to have one set of elections and installation. So if elections have been held, the worst case scenario is that you are installing the current year's principals and electing the ensuing year's principals. If you haven't held elections, you may find yourself electing and installing the current year's principals and electing the ensuing year's principals at the same meeting. If the elections haven't taken place and you're on the day of installation, you simply elect and install the principals for the ensuing year. I hope that's clear. I'm looking. Malcolm's got his hand up. I hope.
Hello, Andrew. Sorry to trouble you again.
Yeah.
When a lodge has missed its regular meeting,
Yep,
and it is going to meet in September, but the regular installation is in October, what happens at the September meeting? Does any declaration of the master staying as master for that meeting and the following one where he installs a successor?
No, because he's continued by virtue of Rule 107 or 8.
Okay, I thought that was the case, but
nothing needs to be said.
Our secretary isn't logged in on this session, so I will make sure that he knows what we've got to do.
No, it simply continues.
Thank you.
All right. Malcolm.
Sorry, Andrew, just to hark on about the selection business in the Royal Arch.
No, it's fine.
But I'm not totally convinced that that answer is the full answer. I feel that if we're just ignoring a year, which is basically what that is saying, how do we note in our records that the first principal who was installed, let's say in October 2019, was unable to put in his successor and therefore by default continued as the first principal until October 2021, when the next possible meeting will be held? How do we show on the records that he was actually in office for 2 years? Or are you just saying to me, just ignore 2021 and that never happened? We can't just do that.
Your minutes, your minute book will have all the document of all the notation in it saying that the meetings weren't possible. It wasn't possible to hold the meetings during this time. And that will be the separation between the 2 years, showing that no meetings were possible in that year, no convocations were possible in that year, and that's why what's happened has happened.
So what you're saying is that you're applying Rule 107, 108 to the Royal Arch, even though that is not normally the case.
If you haven't been able to hold the meetings, you haven't been able to hold the installation. In Royal Arch Regulation 42, it says if the principals are present, you install them, but the principals haven't been able to be present, and because they haven't been able to be present, you can't install them, and they haven't been able to be present because of all the information which is in the minute book regarding the suspension, etc. So therefore, that's the gap. That covers the gap within it.
I know I'm being predictive now, but so if on our summons we show who the principals are for each particular year,
yeah,
we show the same guy for the 2 years, even though he's not officially been. So in other words, 2019 is X, and he also in 2020 X. I know I'm being predictive here, but I'm just one of the.
I would simply miss out the year on the summons.
Right. I don't agree with that, but if that's
because you have the documentation in the minute book as to explain why.
Yeah, but not everybody sees the minute book, Andrew. But with all due
it will be a talking point from here on in.
I don't agree with that, but I'll go with what you say. But,
okay.
Okay.
Coming to Chris Taylor.
Is that me unmuted? Jolly good. Hi, Andrew. Yeah, I was just sort of backing up Malcolm's point, really, that because we've not had an installation or even a meeting where we could make a declaration, proclamation or whatever, we've not been allowed to put in an LP and A4. So what it means is that year is literally a missing year because nobody outside our own lodge or chapter sees the minutes. So how is the individual, regardless of whether they're a master, warden, a principal, or any other office holder, how are they going to get the credit, so to speak, for having held that office for whatever period of time, unless we can put in an LP and A4? And if, like you say, we basically ignore a year, that's a year's lost, effectively, credit for some people, for want of a better expression, for doing that role.
How things are recorded at our end is obviously one thing in terms of the kind of credit, and basically it shows somebody in office until their successor is appointed. So it will show 2 years.
Sorry to interrupt, Andrew, but necessarily in some lodges and chapters, people have had to take on roles. For example, we changed our almoner, 12 months ago, but he's not recorded anywhere as being almoner. So effectively, he's not been almoner for a year on paper, although he's been doing the role. If we just simply move to the next thing, the next sort of period, that individual's not had a year's worth of acknowledgement. Really.
We are going to be clearing all of this up when we look at the yearbook coming up, in terms of making sure that we have a full list of who's been doing what over the past year anyway.
Can I suggest then that when we do the online return for province, which is in addition to the normal installation return, if we add a date of appointment for each individual, that would be able to clear that up. We could put it against each role then.
Yes.
That would do the job.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Right. So I'm aware time's getting on, actually. There's not much more to go. So that's the position in Royal Arch with that. So we'll go on to installations in the craft. And there's a couple of options where the election meeting has been missed and where the election and installation has been missed. Okay. So this is the first option if the election meeting has been missed. And I am in this, I am assuming that there's a period of greater than 2 months between the election and the installation, or what would be the regular day of election and the regular day of installation, as will be the majority of cases which needs to ask this question. So if the election meeting has been missed, it moves to the regular day of installation. That's going back to Rule 106. And then following that, those elections being held on that day, the installation should take place within 5 weeks. And that's usually at the next regular meeting if that falls within 5 weeks, or an emergency meeting if called within that period. Norman, I'll come back to your question. and Keith, I'll come back to your question as well. I'm just going to go through these first. So what we have effectively here is April would have been the election meeting. Obviously, that meeting has been missed. September is the regular day of installation as per the lodge bylaws. That then becomes the election meeting. The October meeting would have been just a regular meeting according to the bylaws. That becomes the installation meeting. So it's straightforward like that. The second option is where the election meeting is conducted at an emergency meeting at least 3 weeks prior to the installation meeting. And this is possible because there is more than 2 months in between the election and the installation meeting. And this means that the installation takes place as normal. So in April, the election meeting was missed. At some point, for example, in August, at some point, you have an emergency meeting where you hold the elections. And then at least 3 weeks after that, you have the installation meeting as normal. So that's the second option if the election meeting has been missed, as per Rule 106. Again, we're talking craft now, not Royal Arch. So this goes back to the proclamation case that we looked at. So this is where the incumbent master is likely to be re-elected. So the election meeting moves to the next regular meeting, i.e. the day of installation. If the result of the election is declared in favour of the incumbent, the master simply continues, as we've already discussed. So April, the election meeting was missed. Oops, sorry. Come back. There we go. The election meeting was missed. September was due to be the installation meeting. That becomes the election meeting. The election's declared in favour of the incumbent, so he simply proceeds on to invest the officers. And then October just becomes a regular meeting. So that's where the incumbent is likely to be re-elected. There's no need to have the emergency meeting, basically. And you still get to have the installation on the same day. So this is where the election and installation meetings have been missed. The master continues either by Rule 107 or 108. No dispensation is required for a third or fourth year. Dave Thomas has asked if a master can serve a fourth year. Technically, if a master had served 2 years and were due to be due to come out of the chair in April 2020, so they'd served 2 years. In April 2020, they went into their third year. So in April 2021, they are potentially going into their fourth year, and that's absolutely fine. Under normal circumstances, you need a dispensation and a damn good reason for it to happen. But yes, there's no issue with the master serving for fourth year in this. Then the emergency measures may be applied, and I'm going to come on to what the emergency measures are. They don't have to be applied, but they may be applied. So just looking at this case, the election meeting was due in February, the installation was due in March, that was missed, and the April meeting was missed as well. So the master has continued under Rule 107, but because of this scenario, because the installation was due in March, the emergency measures may be applicable. So what are the emergency measures? Now, these came out from Grand Lodge in February. They provide a provision for election and installation to take place at the same meeting, not on a day different to that as the installation day prescribed in the lodge bylaws, if the installation was to have taken place on or after March the 1st, 2021, and it would have caused the incumbent to serve a third consecutive year, or the lodge is without a master due to a death or resignation. So those are the two conditions which would allow a lodge to be considered to use the emergency measures. The emergency measures require a dispensation, and the election and installation must take place at the first regular meeting or at an emergency meeting before that date. So if your next regular meeting is in September, you can't then use the emergency measures, hold the election and installation in October, for example. You have to do it at the September meeting. So it needs to take place at the first regular meeting. It applies to very few people, but I just want to mention it anyway. So if it does apply to you, you can get in touch. Now let's have a look at some of these questions. Keith, I hope that this answer has just answered your question regarding it. You can apply for, because you don't have a master at the moment, you can apply for to use the emergency measures for the first regular meeting to elect and install a master. That's in the case where the WM has died in office. Norman, so if you, because your master has continued, even though it's only for the one meeting, yes, it's a good idea to invest the officers. Then the installation return can be sent off for reasons that have previously been discussed. Now, so that is just because you're holding the elections that day is irrelevant. Simply invest the officers, send off the installation return, and we can process that then. The obvious distinction is if that were happening on the day of installation, in which case I'll go back to the Royal Arch thing and just say it would be a bit silly to invest a load of officers only for the installation to then take place and a load of other officers be invested. That would be a bit silly. So that's not advised, but certainly for any other meeting prior to the installation meeting, yes, invest the officers for that year. Actually, it's just been pointed out to me that, Chris, regarding your inquiry, the groups also will keep a track on who's doing what job. So that will be logged both centrally and throughout the year. Plus, when you get Hermes, of course, you'll be able to go in and complete the record of officers as well. So you'll be able to update that yourself when Hermes arrives. So that information won't be lost. Does that just give me a thumbs up, Chris, if that's good? Candidate that was to be initiated last March now intend initiating an emergency meeting in July. Doug, that's fine. Just apply for the dispensation for the emergency meeting. You will need to use Rule 160 for that, as I've already mentioned. So you pose ballot and initiate at that emergency meeting in July, but that is fine. Do we need to apply Rule 106? Do we have a... I'm not quite sure what you're asking there, Doug. Come back to me. Jeff Waters, no, the installation was to take place after the 1st of March 2021. That is correct, because it would mean that the master's going in for a third year. Joining members in both, yes, right, that's correct, Malcolm. Joining members in Craft and Royal Arch cannot be proposed at an emergency meeting. That is correct. As I say, you don't have to worry about it in Royal Arch because you'd simply propose them in writing for the first convocation. You can't hold the ballot at an emergency meeting, so you can't propose them in writing in Royal Arch for an emergency meeting. But at the first regular meeting back in the Royal Arch, you can propose in writing. So joining members isn't an issue. For Craft, you have to wait that extra meeting, unfortunately. So just to finish up on these, they're the emergency measures. Just to go through some general advice before I come to any extra questions. It goes without saying that judicious use of common sense is greatly encouraged. It's something that, like I say, does go without saying, but at times we just need to keep on top of it. No member should feel coerced into attending, whatever their office. Hand hygiene is imperative. Make sure that you're washing your hands regularly, etc. Follow the policies at your meeting place with regards to face masks, social distancing. If you have any questions from us, if you're in doubt about anything, please ask. And fundamentally, if you feel unwell at all, please don't attend meetings. I appreciate that's been rather a long meeting, brethren, or rather a long presentation. If you do have any more questions, I hope it's been helpful at least to go through some of these scenarios. There are some people nodding, which is always good. It's either that or you're falling asleep and you're trying to keep awake. But I hope that you've found that useful. There are obviously going to be cases which require a little more clarity, and I would encourage you to just get in touch with us, because it's much easier for us to answer on that. But what I'm going to do, oh, Chris, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, and another scenario I'm just thinking through at the moment,
Okay.
Simply because Rule 160, like you say, I think the early impression we got was that United Grand Lodge / Province were almost going to sort of turn a judicious blind eye and let us use it, not quite willy-nilly, but providing we worded things in a certain way and you weren't aware of the answer, then we could crack on with 160. What I'm doing now is just looking for, whilst I like to read all the lines, I much like to read the in between the lines as well. So I know we can't give notice of proposal at an emergency meeting. An initiation, as a general rule, we generally ballot and initiate the same meeting, but we need a separate meeting for the proposal. So what I was thinking was, if we hold a regular meeting, let's say my next regular meeting with Old Cross Lane, let's say, is the 4th Monday in September. We've got 28 days leeway. So what we could do is we could drag forward that regular meeting. That gives us an opportunity to give notice of proposal, bung in an emergency meeting then later on in September. Having given a notice of proposal at a regular meeting, could we ballot and initiate at the same one at the emergency?
No, if you're going to ballot and initiate at the same meeting,
it needs to be 160.
Do it at a regular meeting, because then you can propose, ballot, and initiate. Sorry.
Yeah.
If you want to get him in as soon as possible,
3 of them. Yeah.
Get him. Don't bother bringing the regular meeting forward. Have an emergency meeting on when you would have brought the meeting forward to propose, ballot, and initiate at that meeting.
That's 160, and I mean
you can use rule 160 at an emergency meeting.
I can, yeah. I'm just thinking, because the way you worded it before, it sounded like people had perhaps had a second thought about how freely we could use 160.
No, the UGLE have been quite clear in terms of it is extremely unusual for Rule 160 to be used in the first place. But UGLE have said that it would be appropriate for it to be used in this manner and in cases where there has been a significant delay in bringing somebody in because of the pandemic, and that it is appropriate to be used for this.
Great.
Clearly, if you're going to have if you're going to have a regular meeting, and you don't see fit to bring them in at that emergency meeting using Rule 160, to delay it until an emergency meeting after that first meeting, clearly there isn't that much of an emergency because you would have done it earlier. Therefore, it's not appropriate to use Rule 160. So
No,
if you are going to use Rule 160, it should be done at the first possible meeting, be that at an emergency meeting or at a regular meeting.
Except for the fact we're going to be using an emergency meeting for an installation anyway.
You can have as many emergency.
But that's what I was thinking. I was thinking we'll get one in July just to get the installation out of the way. And then about 3 weeks before our first regular meeting, hold an emergency to do a triple initiation just to get that out of the way, because we've got ceremonies backed up.
Yeah,
like Billy, we just want to get things going and get people. So we can do that. Just
remember that you'll need the extra dispensation.
Of course, yeah, because we're doing it more than two. Yeah, no problem.
It sounds like there's quite a specific case here, so we might be better off having a chat away from this.
No, it sounds to me that you've taught me back to my original plan, so I'm happy with that. Yes,
all right,
okay. That's great. Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah. Anyone else? I'm just flicking through the screens now. See if anybody has anything to add. There's nobody waving frantically at me. There's no hands up. There's nothing coming up in the chats. Peter Mann, you have your hand up. I'd like to unmute.
Yeah, just one question, Andrew. As we're still under suspension by the provincial Grand Master, that has to be lifted before we can do anything else at the moment, isn't it?
That is correct, yes.
Yes. So we have the plans in place to start with all the information you've given us, but until the suspension is lifted, we can't do anything else at this present moment in time.
In terms of what we've been discussing today, it is based on that from stage 4 of the government lockdown, meetings will be able to proceed, in inverted commas, as normal. And as I said, UGLE have said that meetings can proceed. However, from stage 3, but the provincial Grand Master is keen to make sure that there is only very limited items which do proceed at that point in time. So it's kind of by application, if you will, from stage 3. But it will depend on kind of what you want to do at that meeting. But there's been it kind of has to be like that, because first of all, we're unsure in terms of what's going to happen with the roadmap. Secondly, with the information going out from London with regards to meetings can proceed, we need to be able to make sure that we can still, make sure that we don't have meetings that we don't want going ahead.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I'm just looking through these. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say goodbye to YouTube. So we'll see you YouTube next week. And okay, so next week coming up, we have the Allied Masonic degrees coming to talk about their order. The following week, we have a Provincial Grand Lodge or a presentation for Provincial Grand Lodge, or would have been Provincial Grand Lodge meeting. Then the week after that, we have an American perspective on Freemasonry from the Grand Lodge of California. So that's what we've got coming up over the next couple of weeks, and a few other bits and pieces planned after that as well. I'm going to hang around and just answer any questions that crop up. I'm sorry it's gone on for a little longer than usual, but otherwise, I shall see you all next week.